In fact, let's continue this conversation around the loss of major metros for the ANC. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the party should have listened to its supporters, and this is a big lesson. The party has lost all three major metros in Gauteng. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Mapaseka Muroa, a political analyst and public policy specialist, Pooe. They join me now for that conversation. Thank you, lady and gentlemen, for joining me in this conversation. Let me start with you, Mapaseka. There's this question of, what is it that we are seeing here? We've just heard in the last while from Fikile Mbalula, who says the ANC did not lose the support of the people, as they like to, refer to and allude to, did not lose the support of the people, but lost the negotiation game to parties such as the EFF. What do you make of that particular understanding of what has transpired in the last few days?
Bratulas, I think he's right and he's wrong. He is wrong in the sense that, first of all, the discontent of South Africans that we've seen with the African National Congress, because they're tired of the corruption and the incompetence. So people didn't come out to vote because they're discontented. But also, we see that in the numbers, people have also switched away from the African National Congress. So in that sense, he's wrong. It's not only because that people did not pitch up, it's because people also did not vote particularly for the African National Congress. Yes, in terms of the negotiations, they lost heavily. And that's because, number one, not only is the African National Congress arrogant, they're also delusional. And they seem to not understand this concept of power sharing and compromising. So they come to the table with saying, look, we've got the majority of votes in some instances, and therefore we should be the ones that actually govern. But if you look at examples around the world, Bratulas, first of all, right here at home, Nelson Mandela Bay, where UDM had only 2 seats in 2016, but they were able to get that office of mayor, although a tumultuous term. We can also look at the case study of Israel, where the current prime minister only controls 6 seats. And out of that is the current prime minister. Not only that, but he's going to be prime minister for 2 years. And there'll be another guy that comes in and is prime minister for the next 2 years. So an understanding of power sharing. What's particularly interesting is that the political parties that came in that coalition are diverse. You've got right-wing, left-wing, centrist, a political party that supports the rights of Palestinians. But at the end of the day, they had one goal, and that was to unseat Benjamin Netanyahu. And that better contextualizes what we've seen happen in Ekurhuleni, in Johannesburg, and in Tshwane. It's XNSA and EFF saying, look, the EFF had communicated with the African National Congress, but at the end of the day, they have this main common goal to unseat the African National Congress.
Pooe, the same question to you. What do you make of what has happened? Did the ANC lose the trust and confidence of the people, or are they just simply losing negotiations and being outwitted, outsmarted, outplayed in as far as the negotiation game is concerned?
No, thanks for having me, Tuas. I'd look at it maybe two or three ways. The first one is, I think, as your guest has said, two things can be true at the same time. One, yes, the ANC does still have the largest amount of votes, but it's still below 50. So technically they lost. And yes, the ANC lost it, does not control municipalities because of, I won't call them coalitions, but I call it let's say, a bringing together of different parties for the ultimate aim of unseating the ANC or keeping them from power. So I think that's how I'd contextualize it. But look, two things also stem from this. The first one is, look, we should not be surprised as to how the ANC is doing. If you look at the last, particularly the former SG, Mr. Kgalema Motlanthe, and even Mr. Gwede Mantashe, if you read the ANC reports from the conferences, the ANC tells a story by itself. Love or hate the ANC, the one thing the ANC does know how to do is tell a story about itself. And we could have foreseen this happening, that the structures or the internal structures of the ANC have long been collapsing. In certain instances, I think the last SG report, they speak of having phantom branches, where people cannot even tell you who exactly is in or who's not in the ANC. And I think for me, that speaks to a deeper problem, because once you cannot be able to control your institution, there is no way you're able to then come out to voters and say, listen, vote for us. Because voters will ask the simple question, who is us that you're speaking about? And I think until that situation is really fixed, the ANC is really not going to go anywhere. And I think this is where your guess is particularly correct. The ANC, while they're very good at diagnosis themselves, the ANC is very poor at taking the medicine that comes from their diagnosis.
Yeah.
And until they fix that, it's not going to go anywhere else. But I think the third point, which is, I think is something which we need to maybe think about, while there are no formal coalitions, because there's no agreement which you and I have read, the issue of saying we're keeping the ANC out of power, for me, speaks of a lack of foresight and leadership in South African politics. Because the ultimate aim should not be we keeping the ANC out of power. The ultimate aim is how we're going to better service citizens in these metros. And for me, that's going to be the big problem, because I can guarantee in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be coming back and asking the question, how do we keep these not so-called coalitions together?
In fact, TK, you preempt my next question, and I don't have much time for the both of you. But let me ask you, part of the consolation that the ANC is taking from all of this is that they don't believe that these arrangements, in the main minority governments, supported in terms of their formation by voting blocs of other political parties who don't particularly like each other, the comfort they are taking is that they are likely going to fall apart within the next few years, giving a path to power possibly for the ANC. Is that likely to materialize? Very briefly.
It's immaterial, because if that's
Absolutely.
how they're looking at it, then the ANC is in far bigger trouble than we thought. Because the issue should be, how do they fix themselves to become a better governing party so that they don't become like the late President Kenneth Kaunda's party, where they simply are just going to disappear?
And Mapaseka, respond to that, but also throw into your response what you've made of, parties like the EFF, for example, who are not in a coalition with anyone, but took steps that hardly anyone had expected and anticipated in terms of voting in favor of candidates of the DA, for example. What are we to make of all of this? Of course, Julius Malema says he will give all of us a political lesson tomorrow at 12 p.m. But before then, what is your understanding? What is going on? Can the Reds be counted upon to keep these fragile minority governments running for the full 5-year term?
Look, I think most of these agreements will fall apart, and that's what we'll see. But I don't think that initially, particularly the economic freedom fighters, had even wanted them to work out in the first place, because you'll remember that the initial goal that they had was that coalition with Action SA and the African National Congress, and to ensure that they take control of one metro, and that's what they want to do. So we will get that political lesson tomorrow, but I don't think that these agreements will last. But that doesn't mean that the African National Congress will then come into play. What will be interesting, and what Dr. Herman Mashaba was saying, is that the only way that the DA is able to govern, and govern without an input from Action SA and EFF, is if they go into coalition or into an agreement with the African National Congress. And then they will have to account to their constituency.
Fascinating times ahead. Thank you to the both of you, Mapaseka Muroa, as well as the public policy specialist, TK Pooe, weighing in there on those coalition arrangements.